if you could just really simply talk about desal and just the process of the membrane technology, and how it purifies water and the issue with energy and then the brine, just for people
Yeah,
that don't really know about desal, to just give them a really understanding of it.
absolutely. Well, in the simplest form, humans have been desalinating water for centuries, 5,000 years actually. The Phoenicians did it simply by taking kettles of seawater on their boats and boiling it and then condensing the steam. So that way of condensing steam is the earliest form of desalination. And in fact, Stuart, that method of essentially boiling water and recondensing the steam was the main method of desalination all the way until about the 1960s. In the 1960s, a pair of immigrant graduate students at UCLA were playing around with a new invention. And in fact, that invention was funded by a nascent agency created in the Johnson administration called the Office of Saline Water. The Kennedy and Johnson administrations recognized that water was going to be a critical need for our communities in the future. And so they funded a novel research program within the Department of Interior. And that program, sort of similar to NAUI back 60 years ago, started making research investments, and one grant by a pair of grad students, one Israeli, the other Indian at UCLA. Rather than using all that energy to boil the water and recondense the steam, which involves enormous amounts of heat, they decided instead to try a process called reverse osmosis. The way that reverse osmosis works is a membrane only allows water to pass through and the salt remains behind. In a normal system, salty water on one side and fresh water on the other, there will be a chemical potential or literally a pressure to push across that membrane for the fresh water to dilute the salty water. That's called osmosis. In fact, anytime you take strawberries and you sprinkle sugar on top, we call it macerating, and the strawberry kind of wilts and gets a little juicy. That's actually osmosis. The concentrated sugar crystals are pulling the moisture out of the berry. That's called osmosis. Same thing that trees work to pull the water up the tree trunk. In the case of reverse osmosis, what we do is instead of allowing that, the water to creep across and dilute the salt, we apply even more pressure to reverse that osmotic force and to overcome that osmotic force, and essentially like a molecular sieve to push fresh water through that membrane. And so instead of boiling, what we have to do is pressurize water. And in this case, we have to pressurize water to many hundreds of atmospheres, and these are enormous pumps. And so, Stuart, that is why the reverse osmosis process, while it is much more energy efficient than boiling and recondensing steam, it still is enormously energy intensive. And so today's water treatment plants, when we think of the term desalination, one of the things it's common to think of is what I call these large water factories by the ocean. Across Israel, there's a series of beautiful, huge plants which produce a majority of that country's water. In the United States, we have only a few examples of this. One is down just north of San Diego at Carlsbad, California. There's the Carlsbad desalination plant. And that desalination plant has a capacity of 50 million gallons of fresh water a day. And that water is put into the San Diego County system. It supplies about 7 or 8% of San Diego County's total water supply. So we don't use a lot of desalination, Stuart, in the United States. But one of the things that I've noted is that when people hear the word desalination, they tend to think specifically about ocean desalination, desalinating by the coast. But in fact, we use reverse osmosis and we use desalination in a much wider range of environments. In the United States, away from the coast, we have lots of groundwater. And that groundwater is too salty for us to use, but not nearly as salty as seawater. And therefore, the energy required to desalinate and use that groundwater would be far less. That's what, Stuart, you're referring to called brackish groundwater. And we can use desalination for that. And in fact, in many of our communities, especially inland communities, rural communities that do not have a reliable surface water supply, they may actually be sitting on a wealth of brackish groundwater that could be used for their communities as well.